Welcome! If you are studying construction here in New Zealand, then you know the NZS 3910 has had a major update. So, today we're going to tackle a really critical skill for any quantity surveyor or architectural technologist out there. How to properly price changes on a project using the latest standard NZS 3910-2023. Let's get into it. Think about it for a second. On any project, change is pretty much a guarantee. The client wants a different window. You hit some unexpected ground conditions, design gets a little tweak, and if you don't have a clear, agreed upon system, pricing these things can just turn into a total mess of arguments, delays, and disputes. This is the exact problem this standard is designed to fix. So, how does a standard actually do that? Well, we're going to break it all down into 5 clear steps. First, we'll get our definition straight. Then, we'll walk through the initial paperwork process. We'll spend most of our time on the real heart of it, the valuation method. Then we'll look at how things like overheads and profits get added on top. And finally, we'll see how that price gets locked in for good. Let's start right at the beginning with the fundamentals. Before you can even think about applying the rules, we've got to be on the same page with the language. The 2023 standard is super precise about its terms and who does what. So, let's get those locked down first. First up is the variation itself. And look, this isn't just some casual off-the-cuff change. A variation is a formal change to what's in the contract. And the really key part is that it has to be instructed by the right person. That formal instruction, which you'll find in clause 9.1, is the starting pistol that kicks off this whole process. So, who is this person giving the instructions? Well, that's the contract administrator. You can think of them as the agent for the principal. That's the client. Their job is to manage the contract from the client side of the table. And critically, they are the only one who has the authority to formally instruct a variation. Now, this is a really big deal in the 2023 standard, the Independent Certifier. This role is deliberately kept separate from the contract administrator. Their whole purpose is to be an impartial referee. Someone who makes fair decisions when the main parties just can't agree on things like the value of a change. This separation of powers is a huge shift, and it's all about making things fairer. So, we know who the players are. Let's move on to the first actual step in the process. When a change happens, you can't just start pricing it up on the back of an envelope. NZS 3910 demands a formal paper trail. Here's how it unfolds. It all starts when the contract administrator issues an instruction. Now, if the contractor thinks, hang on, this is a variation, they have to give a formal notice saying so. After that, the contractor puts together and submits a detailed proposal for what it's going to cost. It's only after all that happens that the two sides try to come to an agreement. It's a very deliberate sequence designed to make sure nothing gets missed. And here's a number you absolutely have to burn into your brain: 20. According to the rules in clauses 9.2.2 and 9.3.2, the contractor gets 20 working days to give notice that instruction is in fact a variation. Then the clock starts again, and they get another 20 working days to submit their detailed price. Trust me, you don't want to miss those deadlines. It can really hurt your claim. Now we're getting to the absolute heart of this whole system. See, to stop all the arguments over what's a fair price, the standard gives us a very strict 3-level hierarchy for figuring out the base value of the work, and you have to follow it in order. No skipping ahead. The first stop, the top of the pyramid, is all about using rates that are already in the contract. Clause 9.3.6 makes it crystal clear. If the contract schedule of prices has a rate for that exact type of work, you must use it. End of story. It's non-negotiable because it provides total certainty. The price was basically pre-agreed before you even started. But what if there isn't a perfect exact rate for the new work? Well, then we move down to level 2. Clause 9.3.7 lets you derive a new rate from the ones you already have. So, let's say you've got a rate for standard concrete wall, right? You could use that as a logical basis to calculate a fair rate for a new wall that's just a little bit thicker. The key thing here is that the new rate has to be reasonably based on what's already in the schedule. Now, if and only if you can't use level 1 or level 2, you drop down to the final level, net cost. Clause 9.3.8 says this is for work that is completely different from anything else in your schedule. When this happens, the valuation is based on the actual cost to the contractor to do the work using a very specific term called net cost. So, what exactly is net cost? Well, the standard defines it as the raw at cost price. Think of it as the rock bottom cost. It's the actual expense for labor, materials, and equipment after you've taken off any trade discounts. And what's really important is that it specifically excludes any money for the contractor's overheads and profit. We'll add those on in the next step. So, once we have our base value from that 3-level hierarchy, we are not done yet. Now, we have to add the contractor's overheads and profit. The standard bundles these up and calls them on costs. The standard breaks these costs down into 2 key buckets. First, according to clause 9.3.10, you add a percentage for preliminary and general, or P&G for short. These are all the on-site overheads, things like site management, admin, site sheds, and insurance. Then, under clause 9.3.11, you add another percentage for margin. This covers all the off-site head office cost, general business admin, and of course, the contractor's profit. Usually, these percentages are agreed upfront in the contract, but, and this is a big but, what happens when a variation actually causes a delay? This is a super important point. Clause 9.3.12 is very clear that if a variation leads to a fair extension of time, the contractor has a right to be paid for their time-related cost during that delay. This is often done using a pre-agreed working day rate, which basically covers the daily cost of running the site and the head office. We have now built the entire price for the variation. We started with the base value and we've added the on-cost. So the final piece of the puzzle is making that price official, and the standard gives us 2 clear paths to get it done. Path number 1, the one everyone hopes for, is agreement. Under clause 9.3.4, the contractor and the contract administrator just talk it through and agree on the value. It's collaborative, it's efficient. But what happens if they just can't see eye to eye? Well, the process doesn't just stop. That's when clause 9.3.5 kicks in. The whole issue gets handed over to the independent certifier, who then impartially decides the fair value using the exact same hierarchy we just talked about. And really, this quote from clause 6.2.2 just nails the whole point of that role. The independent certifier is the safety net for this entire system. Their job is to be fair and independent expert who can step in and make a binding decision when the parties are stuck, making sure everything keeps moving forward according to the rules of the contract. So, after all that, what's the big takeaway here? The goal of NZS 3910-2023 isn't to get rid of changes. That's just not possible in construction. The real goal is to replace all those subjective arguments and fights with a clear, structured, and repeatable process. By following the hierarchy and all the defined steps, both sides of the contract can have confidence that any changes are being priced fairly and consistently every single time. Which kind of leaves us with a big question to think about, doesn't it? We've seen the logic, we've seen the structure, but does this very detailed process truly guarantee a fair outcome on a messy real-world construction site? Or does it just end up creating more complicated rules for people to argue about? Well, that's the challenge for you as the next generation of construction professionals to figure out. Thanks for tuning in.